Democratic leadership in Congress today announced that the Petraeus-Bush plan to end the surge by next summer is not enough troops home with not enough speed. In our fourth story tonight, what are they going to do about it? The Senate is expected to take up legislation on Iraq policy next week. Anti-war Democrats in search of Republican allies are even now carefully counting out votes and delicately calibrating positions in a process that would certainly be appreciated by fans of Tibetan sand painting. Because like those ephemeral creations, any congressional bill tying Mr. Bush's hands in any way will certainly die within days of completion, thanks to a Bush veto. Democrats forsaking, to some degree, the power given them by the Constitution, the only power that can bring this war to an end at this point anyway, the power to stop funding it, instead pushing the line that 60 votes are needed rather than some sort of willpower or bipartisan coalition mission transition to do so. One of the most steadfast war opponents joins us here, Connecticut Senator Chris Dodd, Democratic presidential candidate and author, which we'll get to in a moment. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
What can you and your party do to stop this president at this point?
Well, I think we've got to speak with clarity on all of this. I don't want to get involved in the decision of what our missions are going to be here. That's the mission. If you're going to accept the fact there's a mission on the ground, trying to run that from the halls of Congress, I think, is dangerous. My view is, look, we ought to set a time certain for beginning redeployment and a time in which it's concluded, to do it safely and securely. I would advocate between now and the end of next April, 2.5 brigades a month, I'm told by planners, you could achieve. This has to come to an end, in my view. You can argue about the statistics on the surge. Did it create space? Didn't it create space? The questions are twofold. One, are we safer today, more secure, vulnerable, less vulnerable? And are we going to get the Iraqis to come together, decide to be a nation state? The answer to both those questions is no. We're not safer. We're not more secure. And no matter what General Petraeus said yesterday and Ambassador Crocker, there's no indication the Iraqis are any closer to forming that kind of reconciliation necessary for them to survive. So in my view, it's time for us to pull our troops out of Iraq. That does not mean we disengage from the region, rather, the things we can be doing there. But this idea that we're going to stay around in perpetuity almost is very troubling to me, and therefore I think we're going to be very clear about a date certain.
How do you do it? If you're going to discuss defense spending next week, why not take that plunge and say, other than to keep them safe and assure their safe conduct home, we're not funding anything else for this war?
Well, I'll be proposing exactly that. Now, I don't know how many votes I'm going to get here, and I suspect not going to be enough, certainly, to survive a presidential veto. But I think the absence of clarity, of trying to always find language here that will bring you 51 or 55, ends up inevitably sort of supporting the continuation of the mission. And so I'd much rather see us speak with clarity and certainty about this issue and offer the real opportunity, which I believe is the case, Keith, that if the Iraqis truly understand that our military presence in the middle of their civil war is coming to a close here, that may just be the incentive that's been missing here for them to decide religiously and politically to get together. If it doesn't, can't get much more chaotic than it is, in my view, and frankly, $10 billion a month, not to mention the lives lost, has to come to an end.
Does the Democratic Party at this point risk losing that vast majority now of Americans who want us out now? Do you run collectively, I'm not saying you personally, but do you collectively run this idea that in some parallel to the way the White House is clearly stalling to stay there, that some Democrats at least want to stall so that this is part of the 2008 campaign at all costs?
Well, I think that'll be a tragic mistake, and I think you just hit it right on the head. What I suspect was going on yesterday and today, what'll happen tomorrow night, is just to keep this going long enough for this president to leave office and hand off this problem to his successor here. That's buying time here. That's an awful price to pay for the people who lose their lives, come back permanently injured, not to mention draining our treasury. I don't know of anyone who believes that our military presence is going to resolve the civil conflict inside Iraq. And I come back to the fundamental question that every president must ask himself or herself. Are we safer? Are we more secure? How vulnerable are we? And I would argue that we're less safe, less secure, and far more vulnerable. We've turned Iraq into a petri dish for jihadists as a result of our presence there militarily. I have great respect for the military, the job they've done under the circumstances. But until we Democrats speak with clarity on this issue, I think we're going to hurt ourselves. I think we're going to be, in a sense, enabling the situation to persist.
You're also defining who we are as a people. I mentioned your new book. Right. It would seem to have, at first blush, very little to do with the current political scene. Letters from Nuremberg, which is your father's correspondence with your mother while he was serving as the #2 prosecutor at the famous Nuremberg trials, the Nazi war criminal trials. But something leapt off the page, off page 23. Let me read this exactly. On the morning of December 13th, 1945, my father presented to the court an argument that has an eerie connection to the present. He charged the Nazis, among many other heinous crimes, with the apprehension of victims and their confinement without trial, often without charges, generally with no indication of the length of their detention. That rings with ominous resonance now, does it not?
It does, and the rule of law was what really was all about. Remember, Winston Churchill, the Soviets, wanted to just summarily execute the defendants at Nuremberg. Interestingly, it was Henry Stimson, the Republican Secretary of War, along with Ben Rosamond, Robert Jackson, my father, and others, who argued for a trial here. It was a great line of Robert Jackson's at the opening of that trial, in which he says, "Four great nations, flushed with victory, stung with injury, stayed the hand of vengeance by voluntarily submitting their captive enemies to the judgment of the rule of law, the greatest tribute that power ever paid to reason," in a sense. So despite the appetite for vengeance here, they had a trial and actually gave people an opportunity to present evidence in the case. It was the moral high ground, in a sense, for us, protecting that rule of law, and from which the architectures which really did so much to advance our interests and the interests of relative stability in the post-World War II period were created by that trial. And to watch today walking away from the very rule of law at a time giving terrorism a greater victory, as troubling and as disturbing as the victory was 6 years ago, in a sense, with the damage done here, by walking away from the principles here, we do far greater damage. So the book has relevancy, and the letters are to my mother, but frankly, they're epistles to this generation as well.
And you quoted Supreme Court Justice Jackson last year during the debate over the infamous Military Commissions Act. Now, let me read that one again. He told that court, "We must never forget that the record on which we judge these defendants today is the record on which history will judge us tomorrow." This leads me to a question I think is asked a lot on the internet, but I've never seen it in print or on television or broadcast radio or any of these things. Do you think that there's a possibility that, even if it's just by history, some of our leaders today might face in a courtroom or just by history a kind of Nuremberg trial for what has been done in the name of this country in the last 6 years?
Well, I hope not. I'd hate to see it come to that, in a sense. And we've walked away, and we vote now lately of opposing the International Criminal Court, the very institution that generation, that greatest generation, were the architects of. And so to be disassembling the very structures, in effect, which we created and served us so well, and those who embraced our values, to now walk away from that, the UN system, the Geneva Conventions, the whole issue of habeas corpus, in a sense, is really a great setback, and hence there's a reason right now to be standing up. I've been asked the question, what's the first thing you do on January 20th, 2009, if you're elected as president? The first thing is restore the Constitution, tragically.
Senator Chris Dodd's new book, Letters from Nuremberg. It's a remarkable historical effort. It has remarkable relevance in our lives today. And there's also an unexpected, warm human story, that of his parents' love for one another. It's a great book. It really is. Good luck with it. Good luck with the campaign. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Good to see you, sir.